The Breath That Breaks Part 3. Chapter 17. The Circle That Carries Fire. It began in the old ruins of Dathriel's Gate. Once a fortress where memory had been chained in silence enforced by law, the citadel was now just foundations and pillars, black stone weathered by time, fire-scorched arches wrapped in moss. It was the kind of place people passed through without speaking. But Kaelen stopped there. And said one word. Here. They set the first hearthstone in the old barracks, carved from pyre coal, warm but never burning. It pulsed with a slow, steady light, and each member of the circle pressed their hand to it in turn. Ashra, flame-tempered by choice. Elders from Rhianna's circle, with fire etched into their veins. Children born flame-touched, their breaths lighting candles without striking flint. And Kaelen. And Veyra. They didn't build walls first. They built a ring. 12 stones, in a perfect circle, arranged not by rank or power, but by memory. Each stone bore a sigil, one for warmth, one for voice, one for grief, one for love, one for fury, one for laughter. Not all fire burns the same, Veyra said as she placed the final stone. So let this be a place where it's safe to learn what yours is. People came. Not in thousands, but in ones and twos. A mother who'd burned her daughter's name into the wind. A mute child whose breath warmed tea without sound. A former binder of dust, carrying a single ember in a glass vial, asking for forgiveness. They came to speak. To listen. To remember. And as the circle grew, Kaelen withdrew. Not in shame. In peace. He sat by the hearth most nights, writing in a book made of ash leaf and woven light. He didn't give it a title. He didn't mark the pages. He just remembered. You're building something, Ashra said one evening, sitting beside him. No, he said. I'm recording something. So no one ever has to fight to remember it again. Veyra, too, changed. She no longer led the flame. She taught it. Every week, she stood at the spiral altar in the center of the circle and let people bring their own flame forward. Not to be judged. To be witnessed. One day, a young boy brought a spark that glowed green. The crowd gasped. Green was flame untouched by any known lineage. It was new. He trembled and said, I don't know what it means. Veyra knelt. Took his hand. And smiled. Then let's find out. Together. That night the flame whispered through the circle's halls, not as words, but as laughter, singing, breaths shared across strangers who had once feared fire. And Kaelen looked up to see the sky shimmering not with stars, but with tiny embers. The pyre's breath had made it here. Without war. Without warning. Just arrival. Later, Kaelen and Veyra walked the perimeter of the circle. There were no guards. No walls. Just flame marks glowing softly at the edge, breathing in rhythm with the wind. We never built a kingdom, Veyra said. We never needed to, Kaelen replied. Kingdoms burn. Circles endure. And far beyond them, in quiet corners of the world, a forgotten cave lit with silver light. A ruined tower whispering names into the sea. A dragon flying again for the first time in centuries, trailing fire that danced. The flame walked freely. And for the first time in history, it wasn't feared. It was followed. Chapter 18. The Ash-scribed Book. Kaelen never meant to write a book. The pages had come slowly, scratched by fire-hardened quill, inked in a mixture of ember dust and dried blossom ash. Each night, he wrote beside the living hearth, the fire that flickered without fuel and pulsed in time with the breath of the circle itself. He did not write to be read. He wrote to remember. The fire came from silence, one page read. But when it spoke, it chose us. He called it nothing. No title. No author. No ornate binding. Just a soft woven ash leaf cover, tied with a braid of twine. But the flame had other plans. One morning, Kaelen woke to find the book missing from the hearth's edge. Not stolen. Carried. By the fire itself. A single ember floated in the air like a moth of gold and smoke, trailing after it the pages of his journal, loose, glowing, scattered into the wind. "It's not just recording," Veyra said beside him. "It's spreading." And it did. Across the lands, across places untouched by the breath or the pyre, the ash-scribed book began to appear. In a shepherd's crook, tied by thread. On a table in an abandoned village, open to a page about grief. In the saddlebag of a messenger who had never seen fire. Each page had a single story. A lesson. A breath. And none of them ended with power. They ended with remembrance. Ashra brought back word from the mountains of Corin. "They've built an open hearth on the cliffs." Called it the listening flame. They read the pages every night. And no one leads. They just speak. Kaelen's hands shook as he wrote the next page. It didn't describe victory. It didn't describe him. It described a boy who struck a flame, not to survive, but to light someone else's way. One night Veyra sat beside him, reading quietly. "You're becoming a myth, you know," she said with a smile. Kaelen shook his head. "I'm becoming footnotes. That's where the truth lives," she said. The ash-scribed book began to change. Its pages, once sealed in ash leaf, started writing themselves. In distant towns, people opened it to find their own stories recorded in fire text. A widow in the Hollow Lands read a passage about her husband's song. A girl born without breath found a page that whispered her name aloud for the first time. Kaelen watched this happen. And wept. "I didn't write that," he whispered one day, holding a page he didn't remember penning. Veyra pressed a hand to the hearth. "But the fire did. Because it's yours too, now." The circle expanded. Not in size. In meaning. No borders. No doctrine. Just an emberlit promise. Here your fire will not be judged. It will be heard. And across the world, ash-scribed pages began to show up in the most unlikely hands. A former general. A silent monk. A child who dreamed in spirals. Each one found themselves seen. And the book itself became many. Kaelen no longer called himself a flame bearer. He called himself a listener. A scribe of what breath wants to become next. And the world, now wrapped in gentle light and memory, breathed easier. Because fire had stopped asking who deserves it. And had started asking, "What are you ready to remember?" Chapter 19, The Flame That Writes Back. The ash-scribed book sat on the hearthstone pedestal beneath the open sky of the circle. It no longer needed Kaelen's ink. It no longer waited for Veyra's flame. Each dawn, new pages appeared, soft as whisper leaf, still glowing at the edges, the writing pulsing faintly like a heartbeat made of breath. At first, Kaelen thought it was memory taking on life. But then the stories changed. The first new tale arrived during a morning wind. "I was flame in the belly of the sea. I warmed the spine of a leviathan. And when it died, I sang it to sleep beneath the coral sky." Kaelen blinked. He hadn't written it. No one in the circle had. Veyra read it aloud, eyes wide. "That's not metaphor. That's a voice. A flame that speaks from somewhere else." Then came more. Dozens. Hundreds. A story from the edge of the world, where fire is made of starlight, and dragons weep molten glass. A whisper from a tree that burned for 4 centuries, never screaming once, only humming. A confession from a flame in the hands of a tyrant, begging not to be used, begging to be forgiven. Each story was short. Unfiltered. Not poetic. Just true. Kaelen gathered the circle one evening, holding a page that pulsed with no sigil, no origin. "These aren't ours," he said. "They're not even from here." Ashra leaned forward. "You mean their lies?" "I mean their answers." The fire was listening now. Not just to people. To itself. To its own breath scattered across time, across places forgotten by maps and untouched by prophecy. And for the first time, it was writing back. One night, Veyra found Kaelen by the hearth, reading a page in silence. She sat beside him. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, "It's from her." Veyra blinked. "Who?" He held the page up. On it, in words made of pure breath light, "I am Leora. I was never only flame. I was always waiting for someone to listen long enough to hear me cry." Veyra's hand trembled. The page glowed warmer. They sat in silence, letting her speak. Not as a force. Not as a myth. But as a voice that had waited too long to be answered. Days passed. Then weeks. And across the world, others began to hear her too. A blind sculptor in the far north carved Leora's spiral into stone without knowing what it was. A desert singer chanted the rhythm of her breath without ever learning it. A boy who had never spoken sang. And the book? It began to breathe. Not figuratively. The pages pulsed now. Slowly. Rhythmically. Like it was alive. But not hungry. Just full. Kaelen wrote only one line that night. "She is fire, yes. But she is also what fire becomes. When it has finally been heard. And somewhere, in a place where light folds in on itself and embers drift like stars. The fire that once broke the world. Wept. Not from sorrow. From release." Chapter 20. The Children of the Spiral. They were born after the tower fell. After the pyre wept. After the breath had been unchained. But they still felt it. The spiral. Not like a flame. Not like a duty. But like a hum in the marrow. A warmth behind the ribs. A word just on the edge of knowing. They called themselves children of the spiral. Not because they were chosen. Because they chose themselves. Some of them were born near the circle, raised on stories of Kaelen and Veyra, of fire that once fought and now remembered. Others were born far away, on cliff coasts, in deep valleys, in hollow forests, and still they drew spirals in the dirt before they could speak. One girl, Isri, was raised by silence. No parents. No lineage. She woke in a field of violet moss, flames circling her arms, speaking names she had never heard. When she found the circle, she didn't knock. She walked straight to the hearth. "You were waiting," she said. "So was I." Another child, Tyrion, born with flame already in his breath, couldn't contain it. He lit things with laughter. With anger. With tears. And feared it made him dangerous. Veyra took his hand and placed it on the hearthstone. "This place doesn't make you safe," she told him. "It makes you seen." Dozens came. Then hundreds. But they didn't gather to worship. They gathered to ask, "What can our fire do that yours never tried? Can we let it be soft? Can we light stories that don't end in ash?" Kaelen watched from the quiet slope beyond the circle, notebook in his lap, smile on his lips. "They don't need the blade," he whispered. "They only need the breath." A gathering formed around the hearth one evening. Isri took the center and spoke. "We've been called bearers. Inheritors. Carriers." She shook her head. "But I don't carry the flame. It carries me." The others echoed her. Not in chant. In story. Each stepped forward, telling how the flame had spoken to them, not as command, but as invitation. A boy who lit candles that sang. A girl whose fire healed bark and stone. A pair of twins who shared one flame between their hearts, passing it back and forth with each breath. Veyra named the moment. "You're not followers of the breath," she said, smiling. "You're the next breath." That night, the sky glowed without stars. Tiny spiral embers danced above the circle, drifting gently into the fields, the rivers, the hills. And the flame wrote no more history. It sowed possibility. Kaelen wrote only one line that night. "They don't need to burn like us. They only need to burn as themselves." The spiral was alive. Not as a symbol. Not as a throne. But as a promise in every child who spoke fire without fear. And for the first time in all the breath's long memory, it did not look back. It looked forward. Chapter 21, Where Flame Once Hid. It began with a whisper in the fire. Not a warning. Not a calling. Just a quiet suggestion, felt in the space between breath and ember. Not all places feared the flame. Some simply never needed it. Veyra heard it first, while standing beside the listening hearth. The spiral embers curled backward for the first time in weeks, pointing east, to a range of mountains that appeared on no map. Kaelen heard it next, in the wind between pages of the ash-scribed book, one entry written in a language he didn't know, signed only with the glyph for patience. So they left the circle. Just the two of them. No flame-bearers. No young spiral keepers. No banners. Only their breath. Only their flame. They traveled through lands where the fire once screamed, and past lands where it had sung. Then beyond. Into silence. Real silence. No echoes. No ruins. No pyres. Just moss-covered stones. Sky that hummed with stillness. And trees that did not bend to wind. They reached the valley on the seventh day. Its entrance was a narrow arch of root and stone, wrapped in curling ferns. When Kaelen stepped forward, his flame dimmed, not out of fear. Out of respect. Veyra touched the earth and whispered, "This place, it doesn't need fire. It has its own light." They walked the valley in silence. Every step felt like trespass. Not forbidden, but delicate. Like they were walking across a story still being written. The air shimmered, though there was no heat. And the first voice came not from above or below, but from within the trees. A language of rustling leaf, shifting bark, rhythm in the soil. And they understood. Not with the mind, but with breath. "Why have you come?" Kaelen answered gently. "To see if the flame is welcome. Why bring it where it was never needed?" Veyra stepped forward, fire soft as thread in her palm. "Because we've learned that flame can speak. But it can also listen." A hush fell. Then, one tree unfurled its bark. Not breaking. Not wounded. Just opening. Inside was not fire. Not memory. But glow. A light not born of flame, but of time, grown slow and deep. It was not heat. It was peace. Kaelen and Veyra knelt. Not to beg. To receive. And the grove gave them nothing. No gifts. No names. No blessings. Just presence. A stillness that asked only one question. "Will you leave as softly as you came?" Kaelen placed one ember on the ground. The only one he had not named. "Not as flame," he whispered. "As a question, in case one day you wish to answer it." Veyra smiled. "We're not here to awaken. Only to promise. We'll listen. If you ever wish to speak." They left the grove. The same way they came. No new sigils. No war won. No story conquered. But with a deeper breath than they'd ever known. As they reached the edge of the valley, Kaelen turned back once. Just once. and saw the faintest spiral forming in the moss behind them. Not bright. Not blazing. Just curious. Chapter 22. A Flame Named Peace. When Kaelen and Veyra returned to the circle, the world had not changed. But the way it breathed had. The hearth still burned at the center. The children of the spiral still danced in the fields. The ash-scribed book still pulsed softly at the pedestal. But something in the air had shifted. Lighter. Less urgent. Like a song that no longer needed to rise. Ashra met them with a tight smile and tired eyes. No fires to put out, she said. No rumors. No threats. No old orders trying to reclaim breath. Good, Kaelen replied. Strange, she added. Veyra nodded. But good. They shared no tales of the valley. No chronicles of the grove. No drawings of the glow. Just one sentence, whispered into the hearth that night. There are places in this world where fire need not speak. And still, it is welcome. The flame shifted. Its colors softened. And for the first time since the circle was formed, the hearth stopped pulsing. Not because it had gone out. Because it was content. In the days that followed, something gentle bloomed. Children fell asleep beside the flame without dreams of war. Elders told stories not of how fire fought, but how it stayed. The sigil of the spiral appeared less and less, not because it was fading, but because it was no longer needed to be marked. The breath had become part of life, not its defense. Kaelen spent his mornings on the stone bench beside the outer ring. He rarely wrote now. Instead, he listened. To laughter. To wind. To breath that didn't burn. One evening, a child approached. A girl no older than 7, with soot on her cheeks and bare feet. She held a candle that glowed not with heat, but with hum. She sat beside him, uninvited but welcome. Are you the one who used to carry the blade? I was, Kaelen said. What do you carry now? He paused. Looked up at the sky, where no flame danced, just soft stars. Then smiled. Peace. The girl frowned. That's not a flame. Kaelen looked down at her candle. It is now. That night, Kaelen stood before the circle. Not to teach. Not to warn. But to ask. What does your flame look like? When no one is trying to take it from you? He waited. Silence. Then a whisper. Then dozens of voices. Mine flickers like rain. Mine tastes like tea. Mine sleeps with me at night and tells stories. Veyra stood behind him, hands clasped, smile wide. We don't need to bear it anymore, she said. We can belong to it. And so they named a new flame that day. Not the breath. Not the pyre. Not the unshared fire. But simply, peace. A fire that did not roar. Did not rise. Did not consume. It waited. And warmed. And walked beside. And across the world, wherever breath once burned bright, a single ember drifted gently into still places. Not to awaken, but to join. Chapter 23. The Fire at the End of Stories. It began with silence. Not the old, fearful kind, but the stillness that follows a story well told. The circle had changed. No longer a sanctuary. Not quite a village. Something in between, a place where the flame lived without needing a name. There were no titles now. No roles. No torchbearers. Just people. Just breath. Kaelen rose early each morning and walked the stone path around the outer ring. The spirals carved in the earth had faded, weathered by time, overgrown by moss and flower. No one carved them again. They didn't need to. The flame was not a movement now. It was woven in. Children ran barefoot over ancient ash stones, laughing as embers curled in their footprints. Elders hummed lullabies written when fire was still feared. Someone always baked bread beside the listening hearth. And stories? Stories told themselves now. On breeze. On water. In flame. Veyra had stopped speaking at the spiral altar. Instead, she listened. And when someone asked, "Where did all this begin?" she simply pointed to the fire. "Where all things do," she would say. Was something trying to become more than heat? That season, the circle gathered not for ritual, but for something new, the telling night. A tradition that had no script. No schedule. No end. Just fire. And a stone. And someone who wished to speak. Kaelen sat far from the circle, on a slope beneath the lone ember pine tree. He didn't join the telling. Not this time. Instead, he watched. A young boy, barely 10, flame flickering behind his eyes, told the story of a girl who spoke to stars. Another child recited a poem written by her grandmother, who had once sealed her breath to save a dying forest. None of the stories were about Kaelen. But all of them echoed him. Veyra joined him on the hill, sitting in silence beside him. He handed her the ash-scribed book. She smiled. "You're done? I think the fire is." "No," she said, fingers brushing the page. "I think you are." He smiled too. Later that night, they walked the circle paths together. Not as leaders. As people. Someone offered Kaelen a place at the fire. He declined gently. "Not tonight," he said. "I've spoken enough." The boy who had told the star story looked up at him with wide eyes. "Will you come back?" Kaelen crouched beside him, placing one hand on the child's chest, where a faint spiral flickered in warmth, not flame. "I never left," he whispered. "Not as long as your fire burns." And the next morning, Kaelen and Veyra rose before dawn. Packed only a satchel of dried bread, 2 flintstones, and a single page from the ash-scribed book. The flame that walks away does not abandon. It makes room for new breath. They left the circle as the sun broke the horizon. No ceremony. No farewell. No need. Just a slow walk into the hills, hand in hand, steps quiet, warm. Back at the hearth, a girl found the missing page. She held it in her hands, eyes wide. Then turned to the others. "Who wrote this?" An elder smiled. "Doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because now you carry it." Chapter 24, Where Stories Wait. The hills east of the circle were unfamiliar to most. They held no flamestones, no towers, no memory rings. But Kaelen and Veyra had come here not for recognition, but to find the places stories never reached. They traveled without map. The ash-scribed book remained tucked in Veyra's satchel, unopened. Not out of fear. Out of respect. This journey was not about writing. It was about listening. The first village they reached sat quiet beneath weeping willows, the air heavy with the scent of cedar and cold ash. The people lived close to the earth, warming their homes with stones heated by sun, not fire. No one there had ever drawn a spiral. No one had ever needed to. And yet, when Veyra stepped into the square, a child ran forward, holding a small basket of river reeds shaped into a coil. A perfect spiral. "I saw it in my dream," she said. "I thought maybe it was for you." Kaelen knelt, smiling gently. "It wasn't from us. It was from the fire, asking if you were ready to speak." The child nodded solemnly. "I think it was listening." They stayed the night. No stories were told aloud. But at dawn, smoke curled gently from a single hearthstone at the center of the village, built not with command, but invitation. No one bowed. No one knelt. but someone left a bowl of water beside it. And someone else whispered into its flame. Days passed. Then weeks. Kaelen and Veyra traveled slow, as if walking not across land but through a memory too shy to speak. In some places, they found ruins with no names, where the only witness was the wind and the moss growing through old doorframes. In others, they found people who had never known the breath, but still lit candles when someone passed, placing them in quiet circles of stone. They didn't know why. But the fire did. One night, as they slept beneath a canopy of hanging roots and stars, Kaelen awoke to find the ash-scribed book open, pages turning in the windless air. Words had appeared. Not his. Not Veyra's. But the world's. Thank you for coming where no stories shouted. Thank you for walking where no breath reached. Not all fires need to burn. Some only need to be near. They entered a forest where trees whispered names they'd never heard, branches carved in old alphabets older than breath. The fire there would not light. So they did not try. They simply sat. And left a small spiral of stones behind, not glowing, not sacred. Just waiting. We're not kindling anymore, Veyra whispered one evening, her head resting against Kaelen's shoulder. No, he agreed. We're the space where fire rests. Where stories wait, he added. The next village had no name. The next ruin had no walls. The next traveler they met spoke no language they recognized. But every one of them left something behind. A spiral in sand. A carved ember leaf. A word, written not spoken. Each one carried the fire without needing to ignite it. By then, Kaelen no longer carried the blade. It had been left behind at the circle. Mounted not as a weapon, but as a reminder. That truth doesn't need defending once it's been heard. And one evening, as the moon rose over a meadow humming with unseen breath, Kaelen closed his eyes and whispered, I think the fire is everywhere now. Veyra took his hand. It always was. Chapter 25, The Last Spiral. It had been 3 full cycles of moons since Kaelen and Veyra had left the circle. The wind had shifted in those seasons, quieter now, but still full of voice. Birdsong carried strange rhythms. River banks reflected firelight even without flame. Children no longer dreamed of thrones or war. They dreamed of spirals. The day they returned, no horns were sounded. No banners raised. No trails marked. Yet as they walked over the hill crest, every face in the circle turned. Not in awe. In recognition. Ashra was waiting. Older now. Her hair braided with threads of smoke and silver. Her armor long gone, replaced with robes dyed in the hues of quiet fire, moss green, deep violet, stone gray. She smiled without words. So did they. The circle was different now. Larger, but not louder. Wider, but not lost. The hearth had been joined by a second flame, a smaller one, gentler, called the waiting light, where no one spoke, only sat. The ash-scribed book still rested near the center, though it now wrote more than it ever had, filled with countless hands, countless voices. And in the middle of it all, a gathering. Not a ceremony. A beginning. Children of the spiral stood in a wide ring, each holding something simple. A feather marked with soot. A leaf curled by flame. A shard of glass with a breath caught inside. There were no titles spoken. Only a question, asked in unison. What will you carry? And one by one, the answers came. I will carry the flame that listens. I will carry the story that waits. I will carry no fire at all, and still be worthy of breath. Kaelen stood in silence among the gathered. He had no place in the ring. He didn't need one. Veyra stepped beside a young child, barely taller than her knees, who held a single spiral carved into riverstone. The girl looked up. I don't know what mine means yet, she whispered. Veyra crouched and placed a hand over the girl's. Then let it mean you. As the sun dipped low, casting the field in honeygold, the flame-bearers, spiral scribes, and breath singers gathered around the open meadow at the circle's heart. There, a new spiral had been drawn. Not carved. Not burned. Planted, each curve made from blooming flame flowers that glowed not with heat, but with memory. The last spiral. Not because it was the end. Because it was the first spiral that no one needed to finish. Kaelen stepped forward and placed his hand to the ground beside it. He did not speak. He breathed. And the spiral answered. It pulsed once. Then opened slightly in the center. From it, a single ember lifted into the sky. And did not fall. Veyra placed her palm over Kaelen's. No sigils sparked. No fire roared. Only this. It belongs to all of them now, she said softly. Even to the ones not yet born. Kaelen nodded. Then we've done our part. The spiral glowed brighter as dusk became night. No fires were lit. But the world shimmered as if wrapped in flame. Not devouring. Not defending. Just present. That night, 100 voices sang. Not of Kaelen. Not of Veyra. Not even of the first flame. They sang of breath. Of memory. Of a fire that finally learned how to stay. Far beyond the fields, across oceans and ruins and sleeping forests, the spiral pulsed gently, glowing in quiet places. In a child's drawing. In the flicker of a lantern held by someone afraid to speak. In the silence before a story is told. The spiral never closed. Because it never needed to. Epilogue, the breath that remains. I was born in silence. Before the world made room for names. A whisper curled in kindling. A promise buried in flame. They feared I would hunger. And they were right. But not for ash. Not for throne. Not for endless light. I burned for belonging. I reached for the breath of the one who would not bind me. But listen. And they came. With blade. With story. With grief. And still they stayed. They gave me no crown. They gave me no cage. They gave me a spiral. And the space to become a page. Now I rest in lamps and laughter. In the hush before a song. I walk with children in the orchard. I breathe where stories belong. I am not a god. I am not a test. I am the warmth you carry, when your voice forgets the rest. So light me in silence. Speak me in peace. And know, wherever your breath wanders, I will never cease. Leora, the breath unbound. Final whisper of the flame.
Every story has an ending, but some mysteries live on. If you enjoyed this tale, don't let it fade into the shadows. Smash that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories that will transport you beyond the veil of the ordinary. Subscribe to our channel and your name will appear at the beginning of our next video, where we will pleasantly thank you for your subscribing. Tap the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the unknown. Share your thoughts in the comments. What twists did you see coming? And what secrets do you think still remain? Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and let the next story begin.